Okay, so it's 28th of November, and here we are. A very good afternoon to everyone. Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Curious Mind series. After a hiatus of almost 2 years, I'm super excited to share that we have restarted the engine again. I've kickstarted the engine again and have an auspicious guest with us today. It's been proven time and again, along with passion, hard work, hunger to succeed, it is also being curious and the willingness to explore the unknown, which unravels many other facets of life. With this as a backdrop and essence, the Curious Mind series was started a couple of years ago, actually, during the pandemic. We had a couple of episodes that time. First one was with Azhar, then with Chaiping, and today we have the third guest with us today. I am Vikram, your host, who's going to be curious to the core, and I invite all of you to put on your curiosity caps as well towards seeking answers to facts beyond the obvious. The next hour is going to be an engaging ride wherein we start with the customary intros and dive straight into talent trends with Q&A, and with the last 15 minutes park for a very interesting section which we are going to launch today. Before we get the ball rolling, the last point is the entire essence of the Curious Mind series is to touch base upon uncharted territory and ensuring that each one of us gains invaluable insights and added value via these engaging conversations. And the most interesting part of the LinkedIn Live series that it is not pre-recorded, and the guest, which is Nic with us today, is not prepared with the questions coming their way. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we are privileged to have none other than Nic Chambers joining us today as a guest today. Hi Nic, a warm welcome to you on a hot and sunny, warm afternoon in Malaysia. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Vikram. Thanks for having me. This is my first LinkedIn Live session, so the nerves are a little bit high, heart rate's a bit higher than normal, but I'm excited about it. Curious mind, great topic. Curiosity is so important in all walks of life.
Absolutely, Nic. Great to have you. Yes, the nerves are a little high. I'm doing this after a couple of years, so it's the same with me. Even though I still wear the old watch, so I can't check my blood pressure right now, but heartbeat is quite high. I must admit that. To the audience here, a little introduction about Nic. Nic is basically from the UK, even though he's hailing down from Downunder, Australia. Nic is from the same place which shares the same time zone with us, which is Perth. And interestingly, Nic has been in the recruitment space since the beginning of his career. After an initial stint with Leapfrog Recruitment as a consultant, Nic has had a stalwart career with Michael Page as a group for the past, spanning over past 17 plus years. In fact, he's just going to complete his 18th year. Starting as a consultant in Perth, he grew up the ladder over the years with his expertise in the mining resources and procurement and supply chain space till June 2016. An interesting opportunity within Michael Page came knocking on his doors, and he relocated with his family to KL, Malaysia around late 2016 as the director of Michael Page in Malaysia. Later, as a country head, he has not only been instrumental in Michael Page's growth in Malaysia, but he's also weathered the pandemic storm at the same time providing the right level of leadership to the team across the last 7-8 years. Currently, Nic is the managing director for Malaysia, plays a critical role in establishing a wider and solid footprint for Malaysia, for Michael Page within Malaysia and within the region. And we'll start the discussion with a little understanding a bit more about your journey, Nic. I have picked up what everybody picks up from LinkedIn, but what lies ahead for you? How's your journey been with Michael Page? How's your journey been from Perth into Malaysia? What are the cultural nuances you have experienced? And anything you would like to share how it's been?
Thank you for that really warm welcome, Vikram. It was quite nice reminiscing over that journey. All the way back from my first recruitment days in Leapfrog in Guernsey, which was only an office of 4 people. It was such a small boutique, but that was really what gave me the grounding and the foundation to kick on my recruitment career, and probably where that real passion for people came. Since joining Michael Page, I've been so fortunate to have the opportunities that have come my way. Perth was a relatively small office when I first joined, 2006. It seems a long time ago now, but we grew that business, quite aggressively throughout that mining and construction boom. Had challenges along the way, such as the global financial crisis, which, that was really my first test of corporate resilience, and having to dig deep into some pretty tough times. But it really sets you up for future challenges as well. And after 10 great years in Perth, met my wife at work, we've got 2 beautiful kids. We had the opportunity to come on an adventure, and Malaysia was the chosen destination. And what we thought would be a 2 to 3 year journey is now coming up to 8. And at this stage, no plans to go back home. So my son was only 6 months old when we moved to Malaysia. So all he knows is this being home. So we're very fortunate to be based here. And I'm ridiculously fortunate to work with what I think is a phenomenal team of people that have come through so many challenges like the pandemic and what have you. So I feel the lucky one to have this opportunity to lead Michael Page and work with such great people. So it's been a great 18 years, but we're not stopping here. There's so much more excitement to look forward to in the future as well.
I'm sure. That's a great journey what you've had, Nic. And I have met you in the past a couple of times also, and you've always been a huge custodian of not only Michael Page as an organization, but Page Group as a whole globally, and which is kind of an embodiment of the culture and the values the Page Group kind of carries, and the growth and the opportunity it has given to people, not only like yourself. I know a couple of others within the Michael Page Group, which have been absolutely interesting and good. So good, yeah. Great. That's really nice, Nic, to have you on board on this one. Before we I start sharing the talent trends report, can you provide the audience with a little bit of history about how does the formation of the talent trends report happen? How does Michael Page kind of get that information through the door? And what is the duration you look at? Any insights into it before we kind of share that?
Yeah, thank you. So the talent trends really started off as quite a traditional salary survey. A number of years ago. Each year we would produce a salary survey that was very heavy, just in raw data, and clients used to find it very useful. I'm sure we shared it with yourself in the past, Vikram. And you use it as a benchmark to review salaries of your internal staff versus what the external market in similar industries is paying. One of our accelerators that sits under our purpose of changing lives is to be customer-led and data-driven. And what we felt was that the raw data wasn't really providing clients with enough insights. Okay, and what we wanted was create a talent trends document that served purpose to both candidates and clients, that was reflective of what we've seen in the market over the last 12 months, but more importantly was that thread and that North Star of where we felt the market was going, and how candidates could better prepare themselves for future-proofing themselves in their careers, but also, and importantly, how clients could future-proof themselves for not only attracting the best talent, but retaining and developing the best talent as well. So it very much serves as twofold. If we look at our talent trends survey for 2023, I was ridiculously proud of that document. I think our marketing team produced a first-class document, of which I can share the link to the full document. I've obviously shared some snippets with yourself, but it was a brilliant document that really gave clients a holistic view of what the market is doing, and also the motivations and the reasons why candidates were making certain decisions. It was from over 5 million data points that we took, and surveyed over 70,000 people around the world. So it was the largest talent trend survey of its kind globally. And we'll look to go bigger and better again in 2024. So really useful document, no longer just heavy data, but really insights-driven, trends-driven, that helps clients make genuine differences to their business. And that's ultimately why I'm so proud of it.
Excellent. I mean, the very fact that, again, I think where Page Group comes in, or Michael Page comes in, is more about having that exclusive bandwidth to kind of grow across, and get that kind of insights into the talent data and pull those insights and share it with people across, which is extremely beneficial. And that's the reason even why we are in this session.
And I think the other reason why it's been so useful is, I really like the term local, globally and local mixed together. So many of our clients, have, regional and global remits, and, they want to know what's happening globally, but they also want to drill down on a more local lens as well. And what the Talent Trends Insights did was it able to give clients peace of mind of what's happening locally in their own domestic market. But for those clients with regional and global responsibilities, it also gave them insights into other parts of the world. Whilst there were some very common trends and threads, there were some nuances that were different in LATAM than they were in Southeast Asia. So that was the other reason why I think the Talent Trends document that we released this year was so well received by clients and candidates.
Okay, that's great. So for the audience, I'm trying to see if I can. It's a little funny, and I'm trying to see if I can share my screen. It is not allowing me to share my screen. Give me a second.
No problem.
There's something. It's not. Okay, if it's not going to allow me to share my screen.
That's okay. Just whilst you're doing that, Vikram, I may just do a little plug if that's okay. So off the back of the success of our Talent Trends 23 report, we've just started to collect data for our Talent Trends 24 report. And like I said, 70,000 respondents to that last year was overwhelming. If any of the audience listeners, participants today would like to be part of that Talent Trends 2024 document, I'd love to hear that. Feedback is a gift, insights are most welcome. I'd be more than happy to share that link with you, Vikram, and we can see if we can get some more participants in next year's Talent Trends 2024.
Yeah, I'm just going on LinkedIn, and I'm going to paste that as a link. For the audience. Okay, so this is the here is the link for the audience. Okay, here is the link for the audience to go through. And you get that?
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, it's through. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, for the audience, they can go through that link and they can.
There we go. I think you may have gone on to mute, Vikram. I think you may be on mute, Vikram. Can't hear you. Are you on mute? Seem to have lost your sound, Vikram.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, you're back.
Sorry for that. We had technical issues as always. So what we are going to do is, Nick, we can share some of these slides with the audience. Is that right?
Perfect. No problem at all. Happy to share that with them.
Okay. So for the audience who are watching, this is specific to Malaysia. So the talent trends, as Nick rightly said, has been captured globally by Michael Page as a group, but this is specific. We have cut the kind of trimmed it specifically to Malaysia, and I'm going to touch base upon it. We will share some of these slides with all of you. Now, in terms of, we'll go on to the data first, Nick, and then I'll touch base upon what are the key findings and the trends we are seeing. Now, when we look at almost 21,000, and this is Malaysia specific, 21,000 plus candidates analyzed. The top three industries which are generating new jobs is manufacturing, industrial, FMCG, and retail. And then in terms of applicants, industry of applicants, again it is industrial manufacturing, which is the highest, technology and telecoms, financial services, and in terms of success, industry of interviewees, industrial manufacturing, FMCG, and retail. So a very common thread across this is industries which are generating high volumes or hiring metrics is these three industries. Would you like to throw some light on it and share with us?
Yeah, thanks for that, Vikram. So let's start with retail first, because that may come as probably the biggest surprise to people that retail was really growing. I think where we've got to add some context there is that obviously when we look at during the pandemic, the world very quickly shifted from bricks and mortar to a very different online virtual world. And e-commerce really played a huge part in keeping us all sane at home. I think I had my Shopee account or my Lazada account was my go-to nearly every single day, trying to buy things to keep the kids entertained. It was that feeling of, okay, what do we do tomorrow? Let's get a paddling pool. What do we do tomorrow? Let's buy a table tennis pool, whatever it may be. So e-commerce was huge. But then obviously coming out of the pandemic and come back to that recovery phase, there was clearly a strong shift in returning to some form of normality in bricks and mortar. Now, it may not have gone back to quite what it was pre-pandemic, but retail played a really important in that post-pandemic recovery from a recruitment perspective off a very low base. Obviously, we had 2 years of almost no hiring in that space, bricks and mortar retail. So whilst that always raises some questions, we have to provide the context that it was off a low base. The other sector you mentioned that's really growing is manufacturing. And if we look at that, we know that Malaysia, and this has become even stronger in the second half of this year, we know Malaysia is very strong in EMS, electrical manufacturing services. Semiconductor, we know Malaysia is a huge exporter of semiconductors. But also just that electronics market is huge. The Penang, for example, is growing exponentially as a hub, which obviously led to prolonged growth in those sectors, and that is still continuing to this day. The reason why, in terms of the talent availability as well, which I find really interesting, is that we're now starting to get to a stage where talent shortages are as high now as what they were during the pandemic. As you know, Malaysia generally is a net exporter of talent, and we've had 2 years of talent that probably wants to move overseas that wasn't able to because of lockdowns, that are now taking advantage of obviously borders reopening and then going to pursue those career opportunities overseas. We've also got a portion of the market that for security, job security is exceptionally high for them, probably more so than money, more so than career progression, more so some flexibility. And that pool of talent at the moment aren't willing to change jobs. That in itself puts strain on the talent market. And then we have these new market entrants in like semicon and EMS, for example. You factor all these things up together, and that is what is creating a talent strain at the moment, and why a lot of companies are finding it hard to find really good talent. But hopefully that provides some context as to why we've seen growth in those sectors.
That's really great. Thanks, Nic. I'm just going to take a little pause. I'm seeing some questions coming through. Umang, if the link is not working, I'll share it again. I don't know why. I think I cut, copy, pasted, but the link should work. I've tested it, so the link will work. Jacob, thanks. Jatan, thanks. But if any of the audience you all want to ask a question, the entire reason of this Curious Mind series is to ask directly to somebody like Nic if you have any specific industry-related questions, talent-related questions, or generally market-related questions which you think, oh, this is a question in my mind for a while, and it would be nothing better than having Nic kind of answer it. Just type in your comment there, and I can see it, and I'll ask it on your behalf, because that's how kind of the entire model of LinkedIn Life works. So, I come from a tech industry myself, being in HR, Nic. You spoke about all these industries and the industrial manufacturing. While we are not seeing the same kind of in the tech industry, when I look at onto the other page, or when I go onto the other page, in the tech industry, there are a lot of candidates being interviewed or interviewed per hire by the job type. So is there something you would want to touch base upon the tech industry while it's not seeing the growth what it envisaged to be? There's something you would want to touch base upon.
No, it's a really, really good point. So as I mentioned, so retail obviously features quite high on that list because it comes off a very low base. Technology is the complete reverse of that. So during the pandemic, tech hiring was exceptionally high. So although we've seen a softening of tech hiring in the last 18 months, we've got to have some perspective here. When we went into the pandemic, so many more businesses moved online. We had so many more functions moving into the cloud. Cybersecurity became even more important. Developers were ultimately underpinning all of this tech transformation, digital transformation, which wasn't just tech-centric, but impacted HR, sales, marketing, as entire workforces moved digitally. So tech was really the function that kept the roof above a lot of recruiters' heads during the pandemic. It was the one sector that continued to grow, and again, demand for talent was exceptionally high. So again, context, yes, we've seen a softening of tech talent, but that is because it comes from an artificially high level. But the tech talent, there is still strong demand for tech talent. As you would know, your roles predominantly have focused on technology. The reason why we see a high number of candidates interviewed for technology roles versus other functions is partly because Malaysia is going through I think a really positive transition of moving further up the value chain. So if we look at Malaysia historically, maybe 5-10 years ago, it was probably best known for highly transactional services, the high volume, highly repetitive APAR, whatever it may be. But we've seen a real change in that, and especially in tech, we've moved from just being a hub for, say, software developers. We've got a great startup community here, and we've got a very supportive government that really wants to drive this tech corridor and digital industry 4.0. With that has come the backing of high number of startups, but also FS moving into a lot more payment gateways, online banking, a lot more e-wallets with all the recent licenses and what have you. And that has created a lot of demand, not just in the IT governance side of things, but also, like I say, cybersecurity, and also a lot more infrastructure and the developers that underpin a lot of that work as well. So technology still remains in high demand at the moment.
Okay. Interesting. I like the couple of aspects which you mentioned. Is it because I've seen it, I've witnessed it myself also, that the government subsidies and the government policies in Malaysia are really supporting, one, the startup tech space a lot, and secondly, also in the tech industry overall, if you kind of see it overall, which is happening. So I totally agree with that. And we're seeing an offshoot of, coming from the space I come from, I think there is still a lot of high demand for good quality tech talent in Malaysia and less supply. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. If my understanding is wrong, I don't go by the report, but based on my experience and expertise, I think is that still happening?
Absolutely. Demand for tech talent, like I say, still remains strong. So if you look at the average time to hire, come back to that original question, the reason why it's quite lengthy is that Malaysia is also bringing in a lot of new technologies. If we look at, say, SAP S4HANA, I think it's either 2025 or 2027 that companies have to migrate to that. Now, there are a lot of MNCs that may have done a similar transition in Europe or the US that then wants to implement that transition in Malaysia, for example. But the reality was S4HANA is still a relatively new skill set in Malaysia, or at least it was a couple of years ago. So the demand for talent was there, but the talent wasn't necessarily there to support the demand. So companies had a choice. Do they continue hiring and continue sourcing, which was dragging out time to hire? It was also dragging out the number of candidates who were interviewing per hire. Or do they do what I think smarter organizations did and hire more on aptitude and attitude? I think Malaysia, from a tech perspective, is really having to look at reskilling the existing talent, upskilling and reskilling. As we mentioned, there are talent shortages, and companies are able to upskill and reskill their existing talent and hire, like I say, candidate X, you've got great aptitude, great attitude. I'm going to invest in you for a 3 to 4 year period and take you on this SAP development journey. We're going to give you the skills and experience you need. There is a concern that talent may leave. Of course, that is always going to happen. But what if the talent, you don't invest in that talent and they don't leave? They're not going to help you meet your corporate objectives anyway. So the companies who are investing and reskilling in these new technologies and giving people opportunities to learn, they're the companies that we're finding are able to thrive and able to increase their retention periods, rather than companies that are wanting to hire candidates that tick 10 out of 10 boxes, which isn't going to happen. And they're the companies that are really struggling to firstly attract talent, but then retain the talent as well.
Okay, very nice. I hope, I'm sure there are some people who are watching this from the organizations. It is a very good piece of advice. Thank you, Nic. We have a question from the audience. I will give you like 3 seconds to gulp some water, Nic, if you want to drink some water. It's a nice, hot, sunny afternoon. I'm drinking myself, but you're doing the major part of the talking. Hey, hi, Richard. Thank you for asking. Hi, Nic and Vikram. Thanks for sharing a wonderful insight into the recruitment industry in Malaysia and beyond. Thanks, Richard. At what pace do you feel AI in engineering is growing in Malaysia? Nic?
In short, AI is going to impact all facets of business in time. Companies who are willing to be first moves and adopt that early will clearly have a stronger advantage than those that don't. We only have to look at how AI tools like ChatGPT are really positively impacting many different job functions. But AI also isn't necessarily something new. AI has just been evolving and gathering more and more pace as we can do, and that will continue to be the case. AI specifically in manufacturing, we'll see a lot more robotics coming in. I think that's already happening in some of those high precision engineering functions already. To provide more context on AI and engineering, I'd probably defer that question, Richard, to my colleague Terry, who manages our engineering and manufacturing business. But in short, AI will touch all facets and all industries. And I think Malaysia's got a great opportunity to open its doors to direct foreign investment and companies who are genuinely passionate and committed to investing in AI. Because like I say, if you think about the EMS market that we already have here, the semicon market, AI can really positively impact those functions without doubt, and take some of that heavy lifting off the workforce. That means they can spend more time on those really human-led functions and aspects of engineering as well.
Okay. Thanks, Nic. Hope, Richard, that answers your question. We've seen all the AI world kind of twirl around Nic over the last 2-3 weeks with Sam Altman, with OpenAI, going back to Microsoft. I mean, from a pure recruitment industry perspective of notice period, of having kind of playing around with all of that, it already throws everything out of the window. So I've been reading it. But
what a week that was. Hokey cokey, you in, you out, you're back in. It was quite amazing to watch happen. I mean, when I read the news that he'd been outed, I was so shocked. But I was only more shocked when I then heard that Microsoft had hired him directly. And I'm thinking, okay, what is going on? If Microsoft were a major investor in, I said something wasn't right. At that point, we knew something wasn't right. It made no sense Microsoft rehiring him if there weren't to be further changes down the field. 48 hours later, we all wake up, the board are gone, and he's back in. So I would hate to have been the recruiter involved potentially had that been a normal recruitment process. But wow, yeah, what a change of pace that was.
Yeah, I had the same feelings as a recruiter, to be honest. Before we go to the next slide, we have Umang with us. Hey, hi Umang, hope you're doing well. Are you seeing many more global support centers? I was expecting this question to come. And product development hubs moving to Malaysia. That's the right one for you, Nic.
Yes. In short, absolutely. And this is where I think Malaysia's got such an exciting role to play in that GBS shared service center market. As we see, let's refer to it as turmoil in other markets. We know that there are many organizations that are very cost focused at the moment, driving cost optimization processes, delayering, and ultimately reducing their bottom line in order to protect profits. And if you think about some of those really expensive markets in the region, Singapore, huge housing inflation, Hong Kong, very expensive talent. Malaysia's got a brilliant role to play. Think about where it's positioned geographically, right slap bang in the middle of Southeast Asia. We have a really dedicated, high-skilled workforce. English language, multilingual, not just Asian language, but there's a strong European EMEA presence here as well. So as the challenges continue in these high-cost locations, more and more organizations thinking, okay, well, we've got our transactional finance or we've got our value-adding finance in Malaysia. Why don't we look at increasing to HR, to procurement, to sales, to legal? And that's the biggest shift we've seen in that GBS market. Not only are centers becoming more prominent from a coverage perspective regionally, they're getting more complex in terms of services, and then moving further up the value chain. I use finance as an example at the start, moving from AR, AP, payroll. Now it's FP&A, it's budgeting, it's reporting. So Malaysia's got an opportunity to really position itself as a value-adding function. And I think BA certainly the go-to location in this region for GBS and shared service centers. So whilst you don't want to see other locations experiencing pain, part of me knows that the longer that those countries go through high inflation and what have you, high cost, it will only benefit Malaysia. And again, we mentioned at the start, super supportive government for wanting to bring in that direct foreign investment. So I can only see that sector growing.
Thank you, Nic. If Richard, Umang, if your answers are getting, if your questions are getting answered, do drop in a line to mention, because the only way both me and Nic can kind of hear you is you writing your comments in the comment section saying, okay, I think if you're fine with the answer or you kind of got your question answered. But that's right. I mean, I'm going to say it out loud. I've said it enough number of times over coffee sessions with many people. I think Malaysia, just purely because of one of the reasons of how it is geographically located, and for various other reasons which Nic kind of laid it out quite clearly, is really poised for growth. And then comes a little follow-up question from me, Nic. In the GBS sector and SSE sector, we have seen it again. I've been here for more than 10 years, for more than a decade. I have seen that growth happening, where there is growth and there is talent availability and there is talent which has come through. Now, going into this next phase of growth, based on your insights, is there enough talent to support, or do we need to kind of home grow it now within Malaysia itself?
Yeah, I genuinely think that there is enough homegrown talent. If we look at universities and we look at STEM skills, the top two qualifications still coming out of universities is finance and accounting and technology. Engineering closely catching up as well. So I do believe that there is the talent available. What I do think though is I personally would still like to see MNCs held a little bit more accountable for, it's not so much quota systems, but ensuring that they're hiring enough graduates and giving graduates opportunities. I think there is a pool of talent there that's entering the workplace that may be finding it hard to get jobs. And the reality is organizations who invest in talent, genuinely invest in talent. And again, this comes out in the salary survey as one of the key pieces of advice is to invest in talent. I think if you're willing to hire graduates, you have to do so knowing that at some point they're going to leave. And that may be within 1 to 2 years, especially with Gen Z. And that is okay. But if you can be seen to be a company that's investing in talent and developing talent, that flows through the organization. And even if 80, 90% do end up leaving, 2 or 3 will end up being long-term employees with the business. But the world's fundamentally shifted from average tenure being 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And how many more people will be 18, 20 years in organizations, right? I see the irony of me saying this. But 2 to 3 years for a graduate is great learning. And then take pride in seeing their careers flourish elsewhere. That you've contributed to that individual, kicking on and having a career elsewhere. So I think there is enough talent to support Malaysia. Coming back to the AI piece in GBS, I think some of the AI tools will come in and take on some of that heavy lifting, that transactional piece we mentioned. But that's a great opportunity for existing employees in GBS to reskill, upskill, and take on, moving out of that transactional finance world and maybe, moving into purchasing within the supply chain team, for example, and reskilling in a completely different function and just leveling up and going further up the value chain each time. So as it stands, I don't have concerns over Malaysia's ability to supply talent.
That's awesome.
If you're willing to give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think investing in graduates is the right thing to do, even though, and some of them do give you a good 4 to 5 year kind of they stick around, they kind of grow with the organization. So that's helpful. Good, thanks, Richard and Umang. That's helpful. I'm going to jump onto the trends or the key findings which were from the talent trends report. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so one of them was, so I'm just going to very quickly read through the key findings from the report, and then you can probably shed some light on that. Seismic shifts in employee attitudes and motivations have created a new talent landscape. No age group, country, or industry is unaffected. There's no going back to the way things were pre-pandemic. The change we see today is here to stay. Job loyalty is now the exception, not the rule. Even generally happy employees, and I've seen that, are open to moving on to a better opportunity. Lastly, the relentless resignation cycle will not be slowing down. Change is the new status quo. Can you summarize these 4 key findings into your
there's quite a lot to pick there. Let me start with the loyalty piece. I think this piece in itself is fascinating. Again, because I often look back on my own career journey. The phrase we often use is that loyalty's lost its luster. And the reason why that is we have, if we look at, say, Gen Zs as well, right? We have a generation that have come into the workplace that are digitally native, tech savvy, that have read news of the big tech companies that they know, X, Facebook, Meta, and what have you, letting go of entire workforces, tens of thousands of people overnight. People who have been with the workplace for 5-10 years in some instances, logging on one day and not having access, turning up to the office and their access cards don't work. And that workforce sit there going, how does that work? Is that the employee-employer relationship that I should be expecting? We also have this situation where, if you think back, we got this entire generation that have been onboarded remotely. If I think back to my career journey, and for any of the listeners, go through this exercise as well. Think about that first job you had where you physically went into the office for day one onboarding, and you probably had that sense of nerves and a little bit jittery, a bit apprehensive. And you went in and you probably met your cohort, 2, 3 people, 4 people starting on the same day. And you sat in the boardroom and you went through this onboarding journey yourself, and you created this bond with these people. And then you go through your career with them. Some leave, 2 or 3 stay, but you're going through different training sessions, you get promoted at a similar time, and the cohort continues. And then we have a generation whose onboarding was, open a laptop, turn the camera off, and sit there and go through, welcome to company X. And you think about the first example, the emotive feeling that resonates with you, versus this digitally onboard, and it's hard to replicate onboarding digitally and make it personal and create those bonds. And talent during the pandemic, we found those bonds elsewhere. We reconnected with family, with bubbles of people we're able to connect with and to have moments with, and we created a community outside of the workplace. And now the workplace has become, for many, a transaction of you pay me X, I do Y. And if company X or company B is willing to pay me a little bit more, I'm happy to do the same job elsewhere. So the relationship between the employer and the employee has fundamentally shifted, and the power currently more so sits with the employee. Now that can be cyclical, talent short markets and what have you, full markets. But at the moment, the power fundamentally shifts with candidates. And the reason why we call it the invisible revolution is because you're right, candidates are generally happy. So when we surveyed candidates, even candidates who had just changed jobs, in the last 12 months, were open to discussing opportunities. I don't have the figure in front of me. I believe it was around 70% were still open, even though they were less than 12 months with their current employer. And that was what I found most interesting, was that candidates were generally happy. But again, in Southeast Asia, we do sometimes have this mentality of, happy to have a conversation. Why not try? I'm open to discussion. I'll listen. Whereas pre-pandemic, if you were looking, you were generally looking. We had a portion of passive candidates and what have you. Whereas now it seems the majority, apart from that small talent pool I mentioned at the start where job security is super high, the majority of candidates are open to having a conversation. That doesn't mean they're going to change jobs, but they're open to having a conversation. The only thing that's going to make them change jobs is their motivators. And this is where companies' EVP has to align to candidate motivators. And one of the fascinating elements of the talent trends was the disconnect to what companies thought was important, brand, how long we've been around, where we're listed on the FTSE or the NASDAQ or whatever, and what candidates actually thought was important. Flexibility, pay, what you're going to invest in me, work-life balance. So there's a huge disconnect at the start of this year between what candidates thought was important and what clients thought was important. And companies who've been able to bridge and close that gap are the companies that are doing the best at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nic. I'll come to your question, Richard, in a second, because Nic is into that beautiful flow of how this kind of translates very well into an EVP of an organization and culture. And I have that question. I think, Nic, you've already spoken about the workforce culture transformation, but is it now the right time, based on what you shared with us, is it now a good time for organizations, and I'm talking probably established organizations who have their employee value proposition, the EVP, already established, but is it time for them to rethink about it? Do you think culture is becoming a key driving factor in attracting and retaining talent? Any tips based on the insights you're getting?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And you'd be amazed, Vikram, I still meet with a lot of companies now, and when I sit down with them, and even some of the HR functions, and we go through the job brief, and I say, okay, tell me about your EVP. What makes company X? What makes you you? And the amount of companies that can't articulate what their employee value proposition is quite incredible. I think it's critical for organizations to redefine what that EVP is. And you mentioned the established ones, especially the established ones, because they're the traditional organizations that are probably a little bit more slower moving, understandably. And this is where smaller companies, SMEs, have had a real advantage over big, slow moving, established organizations, because they're able to pivot far quicker and establish these EVPs and what have you. But like I said at the start, there's been a huge power shift in talent, and company culture is a key factor in not just retaining existing employees, but attracting future talent as well. They want to know about what is your work-life balance policy? What will I get support-wise? What are you going to invest in me? So the narrative has really changed from the employer asking all the questions to now, tell me about attractive. I want to know, are your salaries attractive? Is there flexibility? What is the career growth? How can I see my career growing? And some hiring managers sit there and go, well, you haven't joined yet and you're worrying about what's next. But that is the generation that we're now in, is that they want to know about, instant, it's not so much instant gratification, but the what's in it for me. And that is that transaction between employee and employer that I mentioned earlier. And the one area that we get asked about, more and more, and not so much in Southeast Asia compared to other markets, but candidates wanting to know, what are your commitments to sustainability? What is your ESG policy? What is your D&I policy? Are you an inclusive employer? It's amazing how many more candidates, even junior candidates, are starting to flag these as really important factors in decision making in their choosing which employer to work for. And like I say, there are many organizations that really struggle to answer that. So having a locked down EVP and making sure that you can articulate it is so important.
Thanks. I mean, in a very simplistic way, I will only share, when you go out and you meet a person and you say, hey, are you from XYZ organization? And how's the culture like? And what that person tells you over a cup of coffee or a breakfast or a lunch or a dinner, in that one word and that one sentence, is actually what defines the culture of that organization. Yeah. So you have to be very clear of what a person goes out and speaks about. That's all. Kind of summarizes the entire culture.
And is it consistent? If you were to ask 15 employees from the same company, are you going to get a similar narrative, or is it going to be very different? And that also is a great litmus test for how strong the EVP is.
Perfect. Richard, you can ask as many questions as possible. That's the entire intention of this session. But one last question for you, Nic. In Europe, there has been a huge shift to remote working since COVID, and it has been a very slow transition back to the office. Are you finding the same in Malaysia when recruiting top resources? It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that, Richard. We're seeing very similar trends, and I think all depends on at what stage of the post-COVID recovery you're at. Some countries came out of COVID at various different stages, opened up borders at different stages, and more liberal countries that maybe came out earlier are probably at this stage where there is this, I wouldn't say forced return to work, but they're strongly being encouraged to return to work. I think what companies are finding is that it is again very hard to replicate culture in an organization fully remote. There are some organizations that work 100% remotely and do exceptionally well. And I think there's somewhat of a bell curve. 5 days a week working from home, 5 days a week in office. Most companies I see are probably at that 3 and 2, 4 and 1. But it's starting to happen in Malaysia, where more companies are saying that we are completely remote, but we're wanting to move the workforce back to the office. And we've got to remember that we moved into a remote working because of necessity, and at the time no one chose to be fully remote. And all of the people I was speaking to at the time were wanting to know, when will the offices reopen? We want to go back to the office. We want to be with our colleagues. And then as companies started to open their office, they realized that people weren't coming back because we've moved from necessity to a convenience, and we've just got used to it. And in some instances, there were plus points. Companies were able to be more productive as a result of working from home, less traffic, less travel. But I think as we continue to go through this recovery phase and what have you, we will start to see companies putting a little bit more, not so much pressure, but encouraging a workforce to want to come back and engage and spend time collaborating and learn from each other. I personally love I'm someone who, I get my energy as well from other people. So I generally work from the office 5 days a week, not because I have to, just because it's better for me, it suits me. But I think we will start to see, maybe not in 2024, first half, maybe second half, companies requesting talent coming back a little bit more, which is interesting because we've got to understand there's a difference between hybrid and flexibility, and some companies confuse them. Obviously hybrid is the model in which you're working, and then flexibility is how you go about working. So 3 and 2 being hybrid, flexibility come in at whatever time. Companies need to decide what they're doing and what have you. But you also can't have too much of a framework around flexibility, which some companies try and do. They have a flexibility policy. But the more of a framework you have, the less flexible it becomes. And personally for me, flexibility is all down to the individual. We have working mums, working dads in the office. I have no problem with some of the working mums leaving the office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they've got to do school hours. I have no problem. And what the pandemic certainly did for me was it created huge levels of trust. You really learn to trust people. You had to. And I think it's almost liberating that when you trust your workforce, that people will do the right thing. Funnily enough, people generally do the right thing. And the more you give, the more they're willing to give back as well. So flexibility is super important, but it's just striking the balance with your organization and the employees as well.
Very true, Nic. Thanks. And I mean, we are seeing that in Malaysia as it is. Just to round up that question from Richard, Michael Page also operates in the executive search space, and I'm sure in your group itself, you speak to a lot of senior director, probably a director level and above candidates within Malaysia. Are you witnessing that one of their natural, I have experience, but I'm asking you, but one of the natural questions which comes from these senior level candidates is, I also want that work flexibility, or I also would like to see, good work-life balance, especially at the senior level. Are you seeing something like this? Are you experiencing something like this?
Yeah, it's a real mixed Vikram. It's unfair to categorize everyone as baby boomers, because within baby boomers, there are some who are very progressive and some who are quite traditional. But in general, it's such an interesting workforce dynamic where we have these 4 generations all working together who are so different, baby boomers down to Gen Z. A lot of the baby boomers who I speak to in exec levels have found it quite hard adjusting to the new norms of flexibility working, because they worked an entire career, 5 days in the office, 9 till 5, 8 till 6, whatever it may be. So it was a huge shift and adjustment for them. And then they have this bottom of the pyramid from an age perspective and demographic perspective that are digitally native and wanting completely remote. So there's a huge disconnect there. But a lot of the progressive executives who I speak to are more outcome orientated. And I think that's the right way to run businesses. Now, it's challenging if you're in a manufacturing. You can't have a manufacturing operator working from home. It just doesn't work. So it's really industry to industry. But if I think about the more progressive executives who I've met with, they understand that data ultimately can drive decisions, decide business outcomes, and companies are becoming a lot more data-led. For us, our litmus test is activity and revenue. If individuals are doing those two things and the business is performing well, I'm genuinely very comfortable with where they're working. Don't just come into the office because you have to. Come into the office because you want to, and make sure that you're doing the job that's expected of you. If you've got a day full of admin, you don't need to come into the office for that. You want to sit in Starbucks all day, I'm totally fine with that, as long as it's outcome orientated, not time orientated. So a lot of the progressive leaders I speak to have that approach. Some of the traditional ones are still very much, Gen Z need to change, they need to come into the office. Well, guess what? Gen Z aren't going to change. The only people that do change is us in terms of how we engage and embrace them. That's my big belief.
Thanks, Nic. Thanks, Richard, for your comment as well.
Yeah, great question.
You kind of answered my next question, which was on the demarcation of different gender age groups, but you already kind of spoke about Gen Z, millennials, the baby boomers, and so on. So I'll kind of skip that question, and I'll come to the last part, because some of the aspects of talent trends you kind of covered already when we spoke about key findings, and also if I go about the work-life equation, you already spoke about it. In the talent trends report, there were 3 recommendations. One is rethink your resourcing model. Second is benchmark pay, and third is rethink your EVP. Now, EVP, we touched base upon it. Would you like to kind of very quickly summarize rethink your resourcing model, and that comes from you, and benchmarking of pay?
Yeah, so the rethinking your resourcing model, really comes down to the fact that, look, there is less loyalty and there will be more frequent hiring. If we look at Malaysia, for example, majority of white-collar professional functions are hired on a permanent basis. If we look at more mature markets, contracting plays a huge part in hiring of talent. The pandemic has certainly been very positive. Gig economy, working remotely, working wherever, services online. And we are seeing a really strong demand for companies being open to hiring contractors in Malaysia now, which is brilliant. If we think about mature markets, UK, US, Europe, Australia, there are career contractors that work as temps their entire career. They never have a permanent job. The thought of that in Malaysia is still evolving. And contracting can still be seen as second-rate citizens, which it shouldn't be. Tech has led the way in terms of contract hiring. But if I look at our contracting business at the moment, we're seeing so much more activity in HR and talent acquisition, procurement, supply chain. Finance is probably the largest market where we're seeing candidates being hired for project hiring as well, especially at the moment where cost is important. And a lot of companies still have objectives and corporate needs they have to meet, but they want to keep talent off their books. So what do? They hire the talent through a third party, Page Contracting, for example, little plug there, and they're able to bring that talent in without it being a permanent hire. So rethinking your resourcing model is so important, and just looking at different ways to bring talent into your business.
Okay. Thanks. Couple of more questions for you before we go to the last part, or the interesting part. And again, this is back to the audience. If you have any specific questions, we are pretty much going to wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. But if you have any specific questions you want to address to Nic, you can shoot right away. According to you, Nic, going forward, 2024, near future and beyond, which are the top 3 industries which continue to showcase growth, specifically in the hiring space, and any challenges you're foreseeing or any trends you're foreseeing in 2024?
Yeah, I think top 3 markets I think will continue to be busy in Malaysia. Electrical manufacturing services, that EMS sector, electrical, electronic, semicon, huge DFI, huge investment into Malaysia. If we look at the China Plus One strategy, de-risking, for example, we know that Taiwan has a huge semicon market, not just a big semicon market, but high value semicon as well. big opportunity for Malaysia to absorb some of that market. GBS market I mentioned before, will continue to grow as other markets become more and more expensive. Malaysia has a phenomenal opportunity to become a regional hub for a lot of these corporate services, corporate functions, ultimately taking positions out of the likes of Singapore and bring them into Malaysia. And then also technology. Technology is evolving at a pace that is so fast, and that will continue to happen. And again, reasons I mentioned before, technology will continue to grow as well. In terms of some of the challenges, as I mentioned, there's a real strong shift in power dynamic. Talent is in control. There's no denying that. And high turnover, or higher time turnover, I should say, is going to become normal. That's a reality. In terms of how do companies address that, it's really important to focus on what talent wants. Now, the great thing about Gen Z that they don't get a lot of credit for is they talk a lot. They're willing to tell you how they feel.
And
I think that, yes, and they're very direct. I would like this. I think that's a huge positive. They're willing to share. Feedback is a gift, but we need to think about what's important to them, which is career progression. How are you going to invest in me? Also the EVP point we spoke about before, work-life balance, flexibility. It's no longer a benefit. That should just be a hygiene factor. Moving
should get on, yeah.
Exactly. So career progression, personal growth. How am I going to grow as an individual? And that work-life balance. Then you've got the salary benchmarking piece. Cost is a huge factor. I think the next 1 to 2 years we'll see relatively low wage inflation. Annual increments I don't think will be very high in the next 12 to 24 months, to be honest with you. I appreciate people may not want to hear that, but that's just my take. And I think there'll be more of a focus on some of these other areas. And what that means is that companies ultimately have to make bets. I heard a great phrase, leaky bucket. You're not able to give everyone the salary increments you want, and you have to be prepared that some talent may move on. But you've got to make your bets on the key individuals that you want to retain and back those individuals just to stay with your business. So lower than normal salary increments. Some people may move on. Invest in upskill and reskill new talent, and make sure you're able to retain the key individuals that you want to.
Fantastic. If anybody has to take down these notes, I have taken it down, Nic. But if you run a little, trim it down, this little particular advice, I think the last 2-3 minutes was fantastic for anybody to kind of take it forward for 2024. Fantastic. Last, not a question, but what are the key services? I mean, you've been with Michael Page across all these years. What are the key services Michael Page offers in Malaysia and regionally, and whom should a potential client connect with to kind of take it further with you in terms of engaging with you guys or partnering with you guys? Yeah.
I mean, as you can probably tell, Vikram, I am so passionate about talent. I love talking about it, and I probably talk about it a little bit too much, if I'm honest. But if there are clients out there that have further follow-up questions or would like to engage with Page, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always genuinely flattered when clients want to partner with Page. When companies do want to work with us, finding talent for an organization can sometimes seem quite simplistic, but it is a responsibility that's certainly not lost on me. So I love partnering with organizations. Feel free to reach out to me. In terms of services we provide, I don't want this to be too much of a Michael Page pun, but ultimately it's end-to-end talent solutions, right? Whether it's short-term contract needs, whether it's permanent hiring, whether it's your executive C-levels hiring, but also our outsourcing RPO business, where we ultimately own your entire recruitment function and work with you on site to hire, retain, and attract talent as well. So anything that is human capital related, talent acquisition, we are able to provide tailored solutions for our clients. So if anyone's interested or would like to speak, as you can tell, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Nic. Well, all of you who are attending this session and probably will see the recording later, you know whom to reach out to if you want to get any insights from Page Group or Michael Page. Now, before we kind of wrap up this discussion, and Nic, can you believe it's almost an hour?
It's flown by.
It's flown by. And I think it's just about two passionate people about speaking about talent, and I'm glad I've been on the receiving end or on the listening in and make very, very invaluable insights from you. But what we are introducing today is an interesting section called as the Little Curious Wonders section. Now, in this segment, we are going to ask you 10 fun and interesting rapid fire questions which people would love to know about you, Nic, probably myself as well, and probably your colleagues across in Michael Page or other friends and peers don't really know so much about you. Are you ready for it?
No, but let's go.
Okay. I like that answer. You're not ready for it, but you want to go ahead for it. It'll be interesting and it'll be a rapid fire. So we will wrap up soon on that one. Question number one. And this has got nothing to do with talent. This has purely got to do with you, Nic. Question number one. Favorite Malaysian local cuisine? You've been here for 7 years.
Nasi lemak, nasi kunyit.
Okay. Ever felt guilty hiring or rejecting a candidate?
Yes.
Me too. I would sign up for that. What is your 2 a.m. meal?
My 2 a.m.
So there are these days when you suddenly wake up in the night. I mean, with children or with life or with stress or with anything, you wake up at 2 a.m. in the night and you're hungry, you run to the fridge or you run to the kitchen. Is there any 2 a.m. meal for you?
2 a.m. meal, okay. There is, and I have a ridiculously sweet tooth. So normally it is either chocolate, or if I resist chocolate, it'll be tangerine or apple.
Okay. If given a choice, what attire you would love to wear to work? Now I'm asking you this purely because Michael Page is a big group. We generally wear suits to office, So, but if given a choice to Nic as an individual, what attire? Would you still stick with the suit and a professional attire or something else?
So I'm still very much business casual, smart casual, over completely casual. Partly because it helps me get into show mode and to be ready to perform, so to speak. I think that shift will continue at some point. It's more about the job you do, substance over style versus what you look like. But for me personally, business casual.
Okay. Favorite holiday destination in Malaysia?
Langkawi.
Okay. I've kind of run out of that, been there enough number of times.
Or Perhentian, big fan of Perhentian as well.
Perhentian as well. Okay. Beautiful. If you had a magic wand in your hand, what is that one thing you will change about recruitment?
Honestly, the first thing that came to mind is the perception of it. I always felt, and I really struggled with this for a long period of time, is that I'd sometimes speak to people, and when I mentioned I work in recruitment, the tone of the conversation instantly changed. Used car salesman, real estate, whatever it may be. Ultimately, people have a job to do, and when someone's passionate about something, it really doesn't matter what it is. And the advice my dad gave me is, Nic, it doesn't matter what you do in life, just be the very best you can be. And that's really stuck with me. But it grated me for a long time as a young recruiter when I told people that I was a recruiter, and you just see their look change and you can see the cods going around. One of those people, hey. But honestly, it's not something that upsets me anymore. I'm genuinely passionate and proud about what I do. I wouldn't change my, other than playing for Liverpool, I wouldn't change my career for anything.
Very nice. Okay. I hope that turns around as an equally...
I don't think so, that's fast.
Passionate person. Okay. We are still done with 6 questions. 4 more to go. Favorite sport? Easy one.
Football.
Okay. Would you want to share with a wider audience which team or club you support? Or it's
favorite sport to watch? I mean, I'm sports mad. It drives my wife crazy because anything that's on, I have that competitive. I just love competitive sport. I love live sport. So cricket, football, golf, tennis, rugby. I will watch anything, and I'll love to play anything as well. But football's probably the sport I have watched or played the most, and an avid Liverpool fan.
Okay. If it is cricket, well, Australia won the World Cup, and I've still not, as an Indian, I've still not come over it yet. So
I didn't want to mention it, but India did very well.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one very quickly because it still pains me, it hurts me. Given a choice, preferred choice, a trek in the mountains or a relaxing day on the beach, or neither?
Oh, that's a real tough one. My happy place is Bukit Kiara. So if I'm stressed or I've had a challenging day or got a tough meeting upcoming, I will go running in Bukit Kiara, and it's a great place just to clear the mind, have some thinking space, and it is a stunning location, 4 kilometers from the city centre. But I do also love, holidays in Phuket, beach time, and reading a good book. So I'm going to sit off fence on that one, and I'll find a location that had a mountain and a beach at the same place.
Okay, get it. Okay. Favorite action hero?
Favorite action hero? Oh, wow. First one that came to mind was Bruce Willis from Die Hard. Maybe because of everything that's going on with him at the moment, it's extremely sad to see. Yeah, I'll go with Bruce Willis.
Okay. I've seen all the Die Hard series, so I can relate to you. Your most commonly used parting word to a close friend or a family, like you always end up saying that.
Most commonly used word. The most commonly one that I use internally is high performing. My team are so bored of me using the word high performing. But to a friend, it may be cheers when we're catching up.
Okay. With the Christmas season coming just around the corner, my last question had to be that, and a curious question. You yourself, we have children and all that, but have you ever wished for a gift from Santa Claus yourself? If yes, can you reveal it?
Yes, I can. I remember what it was. It was I was 14, so 1996, and I was desperate for a Marin nail trail bike. And the way that Christmas worked in our household was it was all based on your grades. So you'd get 3 presents that you wanted from Santa. If you got A's, you got your A present. If you got B's, you got your B present. If you got C, and my A present was this bike. I didn't get A's. I was not a great student. I got C's. But I genuinely thought I'd wake up in the morning and get the bike, and I didn't. And it was a great life lesson to learn that you get what you work for. And I remember that sense of disappointment of not getting the Marin nail trail. Where I was very lucky is that I remember having a conversation with my mum and dad at the time, and how disappointed I was. But thankfully, I didn't react. I didn't throw my tools out. I was genuinely disappointed, but I was appreciative of what I got. And the following weekend, just before New Year, I got the Marin nail trail. And I think I only got it because of the reaction that I didn't go crazy. I understood the lesson. I didn't understand the lesson as much at the time, but I understand it now.
Lovely, very nice. Well, you've done well on the rapid fire round. You were quite candid, you were quite honest, and you were fun, which is what the entire reason for this entire session was. So thank you for that. It was definitely fun for me, Nic. I think hopefully
likewise
fun for you as well. And for the audience, I'm sure it was engaging, insightful, helpful in terms of this. We will share, I don't know why the link didn't work, but be rest assured we will share with all of you the Talent Trends 2024 survey. A big thanks to you to be on this Curious Mind series, Nic, and looking forward to many more such discussions with you in future. And a big thank you to everyone who participated in this session, who joined us we will, like I said, some of you interacted with us. Umang and Richard were very active, interactive participants, but I'm sure a lot of you have benefited for it. Some of you will see the video recording at a later point in time, but thank you everyone. And before we kind of wrap up, any parting words, Nic? How was it for you? Your first LinkedIn Live, and hopefully it was good.
First LinkedIn Live and loved it. Thank you for the invite, Vikram, and thank you, Amang and Richard, for the great questions. Shout out to ex-colleague Jacob in Australia for the shout out. Thank you. No, I loved it. And Vikram, look, curiosity is so important. And when we're hiring talent for Michael Page, you can spot it a mile away. So those individuals who have that natural curiosity to want to ask questions, I think that's a soft skill that not enough companies really look for when they're hiring. I think it's a great foundation for a brilliant series, the Curious Mind series. So love it and look forward to watching the future episodes when I get to sit and just watch.
And not be such an active participant and a speaker. But
That's
that was
it.
lovely. Like they say it in Australia, like they say in your favorite language. Cheers, mate. Thank you so much, Nic.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you, everyone, for all the audience who kind of connected with us. We love to have you, and the Curious Mind series will continue to grow from strength to strength. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a beautiful evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.